Hey, this is the lemoncast podcast, and I actually have a guest with me. He is the generational gamer. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
Just my YouTube channel, Generational Gamer.
All right, nice.
Check it
And
out for modern tech for retro games.
nice. And just to start the podcast, pretty simple. What games have you actually been playing recently?
Be perfectly honest, I haven't been playing anything retro. I've actually been playing Link's Awakening, which I guess is retro, given that it came out on the Game Boy and I still have that old version. But I've been playing it on the Switch because it took me 30 years to actually complete the game. One of the things I found out was years later, long after that battery had died on my old cartridge, I was in the last dungeon, which was what was it, the Skull Tower or something like that. I forgot what it's called. And right before the Windfish, and only to find out that my battery was dead and that save was long gone when that game was on the verge of being re-released.
Yeah, that could suck.
Yeah, in hindsight, I should have archived that thing years ago.
Yeah. Me myself, I've just been playing a little bit of Ocarina of Time for the N64.
That's another one I've never beaten.
It's weird. Like I never actually played it back in the day, but I keep on hearing it's so good, it's great, it's this and that. So I figure might as well pick it up.
I bought that on day one when it was first released, and I have the gold copy and everything. Still complete in package because that's just the way I am. And I have gone back to that one. Now, that one I was able to restore my save, and I was able to pick up where I left off in the Spirit Temple. Not the Spirit. Yeah, I think it is the Spirit Temple. I just actually have to beat the game. And you know, the original version was unedited. They edited the blood out, and they made it greenish, and they also changed one of the songs in one of the temples.
Really now?
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say to get this started. Overall, like, what was it like? Gaming back in like the 80s or the 90s. Because like me, I'm just a kind of like a 2000s kid, so I don't really know what it was like back in the day. So just
Okay.
just give me a general like synopsis.
Well, I mean, it was the Wild West back then. It was awesome. All the franchises, well, not all of them, but the vast majority of the known franchises today have been established since the 80s. I mean, you've got Konami doesn't really do anything too much anymore, but you got your Castlevanias, your Contras. They all began back in the mid 80s. You got your Zelda and Mario, Donkey Kong. They all started in the early 80s because the original Zelda came out on the Famicom Disk System, which, as I recall, is like 1986. So that was mid. But Donkey Kong was an arcade game first, and that's where Mario and Donkey Kong got their origin. I never played in the arcade. We did not have a whole lot of money growing up, so putting money into an arcade machine was not really seen as practical with my parents, and completely understand that. But when I was lucky enough to get a game, I played the hell out of it. So I remember my mother, whenever we'd go to the toy store, because that's where we bought games back then, there was no GameStop. In fact, I remember when GameStop was buying up Funko Land and EB Games, and Babbage's went out. But go back to the 80s, it was toy stores. You go to Toys R Us, you'd walk through the aisles, they'd have rows of video games, and then you'd take your little coupon up to the register, and you'd pay for it there, and then somebody with a key would go behind the glass and bring you out your box cartridge. Completely different today. So I remember I got Zelda. That was Toys R Us, by the way. I remember I got Zelda 2. It was my very first Zelda game, and my grandmother got that for me. It was she's since passed, but I played that game. At first, I couldn't figure out what to do with it, like many kids, because unless you had Nintendo Power, and you really needed it for that game, you didn't really understand the leveling up concept because it was completely different than the first Zelda. Now, I never had the first Zelda until many years later, but I had beaten it already, and I had played it, and it was completely different.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's. Oh, go ahead.
well, how familiar are you with Zelda 2?
For me, I honestly like you're talking about the one for the NES.
Yeah.
To be honest, I never even touched it. I never even touched it for the Switch. Like I thought, oh, okay, this game is kind of a legend. Let me go check it out. I didn't understand what to do. I didn't know where I was going.
Well,
Like
and that's the problem. Unless you had some kind of source to look it up, there were no ideas where to go. I remember you. There's one town. Excuse me for 1 second. There's one town that gives you a power that you can use. And it's not even necessary yet, but basically the way the game is set up, every town gives you something you need to conquer in that area, and you'll find something, some magic man, he'll give you another power up. But there's a palace that'll also give you a beneficial item. That item will then be used somewhere around it. But one of the things that they never told you, and they've modified this in the more recent editions of it, like mine has a lot of flickering, which they don't do anymore because it induces seizures. But mine has a lot of flickering because it's the 1988 release, and when you die, the screen flashes red and black, and then there's some pits that you fall down. It just it strobes all these colors at once, one line after another, in very low resolution. And I don't know if it does that because honestly, I haven't played the newest versions that much. Basically, all I've done with the Switch version is level up my character when I'm sitting and I have absolutely nothing else to do. So when I'm ready to play it, I have eights on everything. I
yeah,
should probably specify what the eights are. You go through 1 through 8 on your heart, your magic, and your sword. Your attack is by far the most important. The more you level up, the less hits it'll take to kill an enemy. It's so. Hold on 1 second. But the original Zelda didn't have any of that. It just had heart containers that you collected, and you had 2 new swords that you can get. And if you're really good, I've never done it, you can finish the game in a couple hours. Cannot do
actually,
the rest of the wild. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
one thing I do want to bring up about the NES days, like what was going on with like LGN? Like I heard that was like a horrible company back in the day. Like I'm wondering, how did they get away with that bullshit? Like the
Okay. I have one LGN game still in its box and all that. It was Back to the Future. Now,
oh yeah.
Nintendo had. Yeah, it's an
Oh
awful game.
shoot. Sorry.
Absolutely terrible. No, it's fine. It's an absolutely terrible game, but one of its cardinal sins is, of course, that B is jump, and I hate that. It's awful. Any game that back then had B as jump was just bad. Now it doesn't really matter. But anyway, getting off topic. The LGN, I don't know what kind of rules and regulations Nintendo had for their quality, seal of quality, which now is just a Nintendo seal. But back then it was a seal of quality. I don't know exactly what they did to pass them, but those games were awful. They were functional in most cases. I mean, if you've ever seen the Angry Video Game Nerd, you can watch Kung Fu, not
Of
Kung Fu, the
course.
Karate
Like
Kid, and Up for Jump. I guess technically it works. You can beat the game, but I wouldn't really want to. Oh, you know what? I picked up Jaws recently. My son wanted it. I don't have
really?
that one complete. Yeah, he just wanted to go around harpooning Jaws because apparently that's all it takes to kill a great white.
Well, I mean, it's just like that. That's actually how I found out about LJN was through AVGN.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, go ahead.
No. I was coughing. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, like I actually found out like all the NES titles through him, and it's weird. Like I never really watched him, back in the day, back in the late 2000s. Like I just found him randomly one day. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I heard of him, and then I just like binge watch the majority of the series.
Right. Yeah, and I do prefer the earlier episodes when he was younger.
Yeah.
Now I think he's roughly my age, and it's just not as funny. Even though the production quality is phenomenal, it's just not as funny seeing a guy in his late 30s, 40s, cursing about video games the way he does, at least in my
Yeah.
opinion. So the but LGN, as long as you avoided them, it wasn't really that terrible. I don't think. I mean, I Back to the Future is the only one I ever had. I kind of got burned by it. I mean, one day I sat down and really played it, but it wasn't that great of a game. Obviously, it's LJN. And then I'm almost positive Acclaim bought them so they'd have a second set of 5 games they could release. Oh, you know another LGN game that I completely forgot about? TNC Surf Design. That's actually a good one. It only costs like $3 to buy it if you're ever inclined to play it. I'm pretty sure that's an LGN game. But that game's actually fun. You play as a skateboarder. The surfing side of it is horrible. But the skating part, that's actually pretty fun. I spent a lot of times playing that with my buddies when I was younger.
Okay, nice, nice.
Yeah.
And another like kind of big question I want to ask, like, what was it like when 3D gaming was like becoming a thing? You know, like what was it like when the N64 dropped and you guys just started playing, Mario 64, Wave Race, and all that?
Well, I never actually bought Wave Race, but I did buy Mario 64 within a couple weeks of it being released. That was the first game, and it's the only game I had for a really long time on that system. Now, I didn't buy the PlayStation, and ironically, I should have bought it first, but I didn't. I thought that, hey, it's going to be Sony's releasing another one, another one of those 3DO-like things. Because, Panasonic had just released the 3DO a little while prior, and it was
Right.
pretty much already discontinued, and it was awful. Maybe I don't know. Other people may disagree, but I don't think there's a single game on the 3DO that isn't available somewhere else and better. But anyway, I just figured Sony was releasing another one of those. Completely forgot about the Nintendo PlayStation that was discussed just a few years prior, and that's on sale for like more than a house now, right?
Oh, hell yeah.
I mean, I'd love to have it, but I have no way of actually buying it.
I
And
mean,
that just put it
I
in a
mean,
museum and call it a day.
yeah, like the only reason I would have it is just to like review or whatever. Like I have no business, playing games on that thing. So
Well, I mean, I don't even know if the CD part works. Apparently, the cartridge port will work with it, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's just kind of funny that at one point Nintendo was in cahoots with Sony. The two of them had a falling out completely on Nintendo's side. I'm not going to give Nintendo a pass on that, but and then Sony comes out. Not only do they surpass Nintendo, they crush Nintendo.
yeah,
But I did end up getting a PS1 maybe a year or so after the Nintendo 64. I was already grown by the time the Nintendo 64 came out, so once I got over the big thing of 3D, which was still really in its infancy, I was ready for a game that actually used it a little bit more, that had a story. And ironically, the first game I wanted to buy on that thing, the game I bought my system with, was Beast Wars. Awful game, but I've always been into Transformers, and that was the show that had just come out maybe around that time or a few years prior. And I've never really completed that game because it's absolutely terrible. Think LJN of modern day. But I did buy Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which is phenomenal. And I've purchased it like 5 times since then. Digitally, physically, whatever. It's an awesome game. So that was the first one, and of course it was side-scrolling. And
and
then I bought Castlevania on the N64, which was awful. And then I went back to playing Symphony of the Night, which was so much better.
actually though, like speaking of that era, like what did you think when like Sega was just falling apart? Like
Well,
I
at that
know.
point, Sega was still around. I mean, they had the Saturn; it was doing poorly, and they were already saying, "Well, Saturn isn't our future." Remember, Peter Moore said that, and I remember walking in to one of the game stores. I think EB Games was still around in the U.S., and I would see the Saturn. They were giving away multiple games with it, and Ironically, my son wants me to buy him a Saturn, which I won't do because there aren't enough games I actually want on it. But
Yeah, exactly. Cause like it's weird. Like as a collector, after the PS1 and the N64, I feel like I have to have the Saturn, but there's just really no good games besides what Sonic Jam and Daytona.
well, I have Sonic Jam on one of the Sonic collections. I think Sonic Gems has that on there. I'll have to check on the GameCube. So I'm pretty sure I have Sonic Jam already. But the one my son likes the most is Die Hard Arcade, which is Dynamite Deca in Japan. So if they just strip out the Die Hard license and re-release it, I'd be thrilled. I've never been a big fan of Knights, although I did do a video on it. I don't particularly care for that game, the Die Hard arcade game. Yeah, and Daytona, I have that on the Dreamcast and the PS3. But I will tell you this, I do remember in 2001 when Sega said, you know what, we're not doing hardware anymore.
Actually, yeah, this is another question I want to ask. What was it like just playing? What was it like just seeing, Sega games being put on the Nintendo consoles? Like, was it just like heartbreaking or was it bad? Like, what did you guys think?
I still find it strange, and I usually reference that whenever I play F-Zero X, GX, and I've done that it's my test game on pretty much anything GameCube. So I usually say something to that effect because you have Nintendo's logo, and then right underneath it you have Sega's logo because they developed it.
Exactly. Right.
And that is weird, even to me to this day. Now I know people who were born after 2001 doesn't mean anything. Or having a Sega game on PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo doesn't mean anything, but from somebody who grew up in the 80s when they competed against Nintendo, although very poorly until the Genesis, it is still very strange to me.
Yeah, but speaking of that era though, like what was it like after playing online for the first time with the OG Xbox or like the Dreamcast?
Well, I never played online with the Dreamcast. I never had any real reason to. And despite the fact I've been making videos recently of an Xbox that's on loan, I don't actually own it. I've never owned an Xbox. And the reason why I've never owned an Xbox is really moot at this point, but when I was in college, I started off as a game tester, but I moved. That's a story for another time. The games I tested were pretty bad. But anyway, afterwards I was doing help desk, and I dealt with Windows all the time. And once they announced that they were making a console, I was like, I am never getting this thing ever, and I haven't. But surprisingly, they haven't blue screened.
And I
Much,
mean,
to my knowledge.
I guess I can understand that, like when you just see Microsoft in computers and then you see them, releasing a game console, I can understand why people could be a bit hesitant.
Oh yeah. So the big time for game testing is before Christmas. After Christmas, we got moved over to troubleshooting those games, and on a PC, it became a huge pain in the butt. And that was when I really despised Microsoft the most. Like, does this stuff ever work? I mean, their operating systems have gotten a lot better. I mean, Windows 10 is a pretty decent platform. I say that as I'm using a Mac right now.
Right.
But I've never owned an Xbox. I'm not opposed to owning an Xbox, but I don't think, just call it a hunch, I don't think that beyond this console generation, Microsoft's going to be in the game.
And I mean, I understand that. It's just I still, have hope for the Xbox Series X, but yeah, I don't think it's gonna go well.
Well, I'm not saying it's not going to go well. It may go very well, but at the time when the Xbox came out, it came out because PC gaming was waning, and that was Microsoft's bread and butter for use on the Microsoft operating system. Its name was derived from DirectX, which is the library that's used for the graphics and audio on a Microsoft computer, or a Microsoft OS-based computer. And they called it the Direct Xbox, and then marketing liked it, so they truncated it to just Xbox. And now the PC gaming is really, it's shining now. I don't play PC games. I'm more of a Nintendo fanboy at this point, but I do plan to buy a PS5 at some point. I don't know if it'll be on launch. But getting back to the Xbox, the Xbox, now that it's kind of done its job, I don't really see them hanging around with that too much more. I imagine it's quite a pricey endeavor for them to release one of those things, get the licenses for all those games, and then, I mean, they have the money, I'm sure, but then again, why bother if you don't need to? You can just release an operating system that's compatible with games from these same publishers anyway. And also, they've got their xCloud coming out, so at that point, if they do this Netflix for games style thing, then, why bother? Yeah, I mean, at this point, now you can have all these games played on anything, and as long as their systems are up, they don't even have to be bothered with physical hardware.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I still have like hope for consoles or whatever though. Like,
well, I'm not saying consoles will go away. I think Sony and Nintendo will be around forever. I just think Microsoft is gonna disappear.
Actually, though, another question I want to ask, like, what would like just see Nintendo just go downhill?
So Nintendo, back in the 80s, they were unstoppable. Well, if you look at the sales numbers from back then versus like the PlayStation 2, it was a microcosm of electronics. Even though they had like 85-90% of the market share, video games still weren't so prevalent like they were with the PS2, where it was just, well, I don't know. You can see the number. If you look at the best-selling console, NES isn't anywhere near PlayStation 2. And I have to pull up the numbers to give it a specific. But anyway, I remember the NES was starting to wane a little bit when the Genesis really started getting big. And that's about the time when I bought my Genesis. I saved up for it and got it. I loved it. I got mine with Sonic. So Altered Beast had already been removed from the pack end, and Sonic, their new hip game, was the one that was being sold with the console. One controller, which is the way every game system sold today, and the Super Nintendo was always a little bit off. So my mindset back then was, alright, Nintendo will come out, maybe slow to gain traction, and then it'll just blow away the competition. Now my 12, 13, 14, I don't remember how old I was back then, brain was telling me I want a console now that's 16-bit. And that's what I did. I did eventually save up for a Super Nintendo, and I still have my childhood Super Nintendo in my house. Still works. It has not turned pea green yet, or pea yellow yet, but it still works. I don't use it anymore. I've moved to the analog consoles for the Genesis and SNES. Anyway, but I figured along the same lines would happen with the N64. Now, the N64 came out after the PlayStation. I waited and waited and waited because back then, the PlayStation was coming. The PlayStation was out. The Saturn was out. And although the Saturn had some nice-looking games, nothing really impressed me because Donkey Kong Country came out around that point. And I bought Donkey Kong Country, and I was perfectly happy to play it. I was playing Metroid Prime with my buddies, not Metroid Prime, Super Metroid with my buddies, and that game had a great story, great music, didn't have any of that horrible slowdown from the early days of the Super NES. It was just all-time great fun. Didn't have any reason to upgrade. So, what was it, 1996 when the N64 came out? I probably bought it around that, within the month of it being released. Finding it was difficult. I hate that controller to this day.
Oh hell yeah! This is like my one complaint with the N64. Like, again, I never really played played it too much back in the day, but the controller fucking sucks. Like I bought a third party one
Which one?
It's called Old School, whatever.
No. I'm not. I tried their Classic console, that dual port thing for the NES and the SNES, and that thing died pretty quickly. I would never even consider their stuff again.
Yeah, man, like they honestly suck. I bought an Xbox controller from them. God.
Would not even consider it. But the brawler from Retro Fighters is pretty cool. My only gripe with it, and I've been telling anybody who will listen about this, is that, you know, with the N64, the Z button was predominantly used as L on that console. I want whatever company makes another one of these controllers as third party, make one that's mappable. The only one I've seen so far that does a good job, and that's because you can completely map the controller, is FrathNet. And I use a Wavebird on it. That is the only controller that has mappable buttons right now. I did a review recently on the Hypercan Admiral. It's an alright controller. I've used it more since the review, but the buttons are really close together, so it's not that uncommon to use the Z button in lieu of the L button, which is right above it. But again, wish it was mappable. I've never used the D-pad for any extended period of time because most games don't require it, especially the games I have. None of them ever required it. The only ones that ever did were fighting games, and that is not the console I want to play fighting games on.
Yeah.
Have you ever played Mortal Kombat 4 on that?
No.
Okay. So, the graphics look better than the PlayStation version. And that's, not saying a lot. The graphics are a little bit better. But where the PlayStation had CD capacity, it would allow you to have full motion videos for the ending of the characters. The N64 characters, it's almost like the Super Nintendo or Genesis versions where they just have text-based and cartoony versions. Yeah. Not a big fan of that game. That's the only game I ever played that required the D-pad, where I held it like a normal controller. I have high hopes for the Trident, we'll see. Trident HD and Trident 64 that's wireless coming out. We'll see what happens with that, but generally speaking, I use the Wavebird or GameCube controller on the N64 because I absolutely hate the one it came with. And mine still work. I don't have any drift with the L stick yet. That probably has more to do with the fact I stopped using it once I got into the PlayStation.
Well, alright, I guess this is my last question because we gotta start wrapping it up, I guess, but...
I can talk forever.
I actually gotta go do something in a few minutes, so unfortunately...
That's alright.
This is my last question. It's kind of a weird one, but like, I saw your video on Region. I saw your video of you doing your tour on Region, I was just like, what the fuck? I shopped there, like, that's where I got my whole collection from. I'm like, oh, somebody actually knows about this store?
Oh, so you're local too, okay. I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah, it's a nice store, I like the owners. And, I mean, it's not particularly close to them, but it's also not that far. But I've gotten a lot of stuff from them. My Wii U was actually from there. That was one of the more recent purchases, which is still a while ago, but anyway. And then my kids, they'll always find a cartridge when we go in there. So, yeah, it's a nice place. I love the arcade. Seeing a full-scale Naomi, which is basically a Dreamcast arcade machine, which I think they still have Marvel vs. Capcom 2 there. And they got the two-player Turtles game, and then they have the Neo Geo set up. Personally, I've never been a huge Neo Geo fan, but the games that I do find of interest, I pretty much have them on the Switch now. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, the folks there are real nice. Colin, who was in that interview, he's no longer there, but Jake still is. They're each one of the owners. I don't know if Colin's still an owner, but they're all pretty friendly. I can call them, I'd say, hey, I'm looking for this game. All right. And then I say, I'm ridiculously anal when it comes to the condition of the game. Is it worth me coming over? And they'll say yay or nay. So, one of my buddies who I borrow most of this stuff from, when I like the Xbox and the Saturn and stuff like that, he buys something there almost every day. So they'll just let him know what's new that's coming up. So, anyway, yeah, it's a cool store. I like it. I know my kids all like it.
Yeah, I usually shop there like once in a while, like whenever I want to pick up a new console, I usually just go over there. But yeah, it's a great store.
You know what I like about it? It's they take apart the consoles, which means I know they'll clean out the bugs that are inevitably going to be in somebody's old console.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I have a story though. Like, I went over there to pick up an original Xbox, and I saw a game on there, and I'm like, what? And I was playing Sega GT 2002, and I saw the music track 50%. I'm like, what, they get the license to use that song? And then I go on the Xbox music thing, and there's just this guy's whole music collection of just 2000s hip hop.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that's one of the quirky things about collecting. Like, I mean, it's just weird. Though. Like, another time, I actually found like the person's all the cheat codes. I think it was Tony Hawk's from Gear 3, and I was just going through the manual one day, and I just saw this picture of a whole bunch of cheat codes.
Okay, so you mentioned that. Do you remember back? I don't know if they still do this or how long ago it stopped. Back in the cartridge days, when you would buy a game, there was a section in the back where you could write down passwords and cheat codes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I have turned away from games just because that's in there. I can't remove that easily. So if the manual has that, the manual's a no-go for me. I'm that picky when it comes to them.
Well, I mean, why don't you want the person's, cheat codes or whatever?
Because it's not the pristine manual. I want it in great condition. No, I don't. It's not the cheat codes that I don't want. I'm just really, really picky when it comes to the quality of the game.
I could understand that.
So, my manuals, like, all right, Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game that came out, I don't know, 90? Probably 91, I don't know. It was on the original NES. Had a Pizza Hut coupon on the back. Now, I don't remember whether or not I would have eaten Pizza Hut back then. Mine still has the coupon on it. None of my games that I bought or that I got when I was young have any writing in the manual.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's just like I understand why you're like picky on manuals. It's just it's kind of weird, but again, I understand it.
It's weird, all right. And writing on the box, that's a big no-no. I can usually fix it if it's still in the cartridge.
Actually, though, you know what sucks though?
What?
Fucking stickers.
They're not too hard to get off. If you take your time, you can get them off usually. Now, if it's cartridge-based, I will take the cartridge apart and only handle the part that actually has the sticker on it. But if you use some Goo Gone and you're really careful with it, then you can usually get a sticker off without too much damage. Because I don't want the Goo Gone, you don't want anywhere near the circuitry. But on the box, it's harder to get it off because cardboard is destructive. It's destructible easily. But on something solid, not that big of a deal.
Well,
and then after you're done with it, clean it up with a little alcohol, as long as it's not on a sticker like a label on the game. And don't ever do that on a CD. By the way, I'm going to let you go in a second. If you see a CD with stickers on it, not only is that going to damage it if you pull the sticker off because the data is actually underneath the label of the CD, but it's going to change the wobble of the disc, so it's going to be off balance, and That's a no-go for me too. I won't even consider one that has a sticker on it.
Oh hell yeah, I had to learn that the hard way. Like when I got when I got an Xbox game, it had the sticker on the disc. I just tried to
Nope.
take it off like any other disc, and yeah, the disc got messed up.
Completely destroys the game. And if you hold them up to a light, if you can see through them, you're missing data on that disc. So if you see like little pinholes, just put it aside. Regen checks for that, by the way. They'll hold it up to the light when you try to bring them in.
All
What are you
right.
doing? All right.
Uh, I guess we're gonna wrap this up. Go check out the generational game. Go check out the generational gamer. I guess check out his YouTube channel. Follow me on
Please.
Twitch. Follow me on Discord, and yeah. Is there anything
Yeah.
else you want to say?
Well, that's it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.